Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and a warm welcome to this annual meeting's conversation on jobs and economic transformation. My name is Nozi Pombanjwa, and it is an absolute privilege to be your moderator for this conversation. The hope is that this conversation is going to challenge us to deepen our understanding of the roles that the private sector and the public sector in sub-Saharan Africa and the MENA region are playing in creating jobs and transforming their economies. This conversation, we hope, is also going to challenge us to think critically about how organizations like the World Bank Group can support initiatives to create jobs and to transform economies where the need is greatest. My panelists who have joined me here on stage are going to be bringing their voices, their insights, and their experiences to surface both challenges and successes. They're going to surface the challenges that they are confronted with in their efforts around job creation and economic transformation. But equally important, ladies and gentlemen, they're going to be surfacing some very specific success examples that can be replicated across sectors and that have the possibility of being scaled into different markets. I'd like to challenge you this morning to claim your share of voice in this conversation. And we're going to be doing this in two ways. The first of these is that we're going to be connecting live on live.worldbank.org. So we're truly having a global conversation because the issue of job creation and economic transformation, I'm sure you will agree with me, is a global one that supersedes sub-Saharan Africa and MENA and is potentially at the top of every agenda of every leader across the world. But ladies and gentlemen, we're also going to ask you to use your phones and to use the hashtag Jobs for Growth. We're using numeric 4, Jobs for Growth, as the hashtag that is going to allow us to share the insights and the nuggets that are coming out of this conversation with the world. And where possible, we will pull in those voices into the conversation. To kick us off, I'd like to invite the CEO of the IFC, Mr. Philippe Lehouro, to please come up and give us his brief opening remarks, after which I will introduce our panelists and we will start with our conversation. Can we put our hands together for Philippe, please?
Thank you all. Thank you very much for coming, and good morning all. And welcome to our panel on jobs and economic transformation. It's a very important topic, but it's a huge and very complex topic. So I'd like to focus my short remarks on Africa. So we know that the region has a huge potential, but at the same time, the continent faces many development hurdles. Public debt levels are rising, fragility in some part of the continent is costing about 0.5 percentage point of growth per year. And the availability of good jobs has not kept pace with the new entrants in the labor force. In fact, we estimate that in Africa we need to create 1.7 million jobs every month. Every month. So we know one thing: business as usual is not going to do it. And the only way we can do it is, in fact, the subject of this panel is we need economic transformation. Now, when we have said that, everybody can agree. The question now is how? How to do it? And it's very difficult. So, and I got inspired by, we were at the CEO Forum in March in Kigali, by what President Kagame was saying. Because we were struggling to find and I think he found the right word. He summarized everything in one word, which is we need to change the mindset. And this is true for all of us. African governments, development partners, World Bank Group and others, and the private sector. We think about the public and private sectors in economic growth and job creation. We need a new approach between the public and the private sector to unlock this region potential. We need government that step up efforts to ensure sound macroeconomic management, debt transparency and sustainability, as well as legal and regulatory framework that provide attractive and level playing field for private companies. And we need the private sector pioneers who see more the great opportunity than the possible risks to doing business in Africa. Together, I believe deeply that the public and private sector can ignite the region's economy. And at the regional level, the African Continental Free Trade Area, which will make the region the largest free trade area in the world, is a huge breakthrough and a signal of this change of mindset. This is not a new, we have been discussing for decades. Now it's been transformed into reality. At least the will transform into legal. Now we need to do it, but that's, I think, it's a breakthrough, and I will encourage more trade. That will encourage more trade, more investment, and the promise of the developing of regional value chains. And it can serve as an anchor for reform. Also encouraging, in my view, is the African Union Digital Transformation Initiative. We offer an unprecedented opportunity for the continent to leapfrog the traditional development path. The initiative has the potential to drive innovation, economic growth, job creation in many key sectors of the economy. It will also enable greater interconnection between African markets and between Africa and the rest of the world. At the World Bank Group, we are embracing this change of mindset. We are increasing our support to African governments to diversify their economy and implement pro-business reforms. We have developed a new approach that we call the Cascade, by which we pursue private sector solutions where sustainable, so that scarce public resources can be used where they are needed most. In fact, the World Bank Group, if you think about it, the way I see it, is a big de-risking machine. We de-risk countries through the World Bank by having policy-based lending. We de-risk sectors on the public side by having public sector investment. But also we de-risk on the private sectors through IFC, direct lending, and MEGA insurances. So we are really a de-risking machine taken as a group, and we complement each other. And at IFC, we're also changing the way we work. We're changing our mindset. And we're shifting from being reactive, which we have been very successful at for 60 years, to proactive. What does that mean? It means instead of waiting for a private sector to come and present up a project, an investment project to finance, we will design the project investment to finance and go after potential private investor to come and invest. And you know, it's not a dream. We are actually doing it in solar. And we have great stories, and I'm sure Minister Nasser may elaborate on that. I don't want to spend too much time, but we can do it. Yes, we can do it. And we can do it beyond solar in many other sectors. So that's a huge shift. It's a cultural shift in IFC. We are aligning our approaches, our tools, diagnostic tools, but also a tool that I feel is very important for us, which is the private sector window in IDA. It may sound esoteric to some of you, but for us it's very important, because in some country, private sector will come when the risk return works. Sometimes the perceived risk is so high that the return to compensate will be so high that the project doesn't become feasible financially. So how do you play this equation? We decided to play on the risk side. And we had the breakthrough in IDA 18, where we have this window. I don't want to elaborate, but it's a great tool. So we're developing new tools, new approaches, new way, new organization. We're opening 9 new offices in addition to the 25 that we have already in Africa this year. We are staffing up. We are really going all out. That's a huge change in mindset. and we will continue, and it will pay out. But since I'm talking PSW and IDA, I want to say a few words about IDA. We are just 2 months away from the closure of IDA 19. And the JET that we're talking about, job and economic transformation, is one of the key issues and theme for this IDA 19. So I want to call on you to please help us convince the donor countries to contribute. We need resources. It's a unique blend of the World Bank Group knowledge, public and private, but knowledge and money. So we need, for the poorest country, and 2/3 of the IDA resources go to Africa. So we need your support to have this IDA 19 a success. And time is running out. I will stop here, and I'm very, very, very pleased that we have a fantastic panel of very high government officials, great CEOs, and you will enjoy, I'm sure, a great discussion for this fundamental topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philippe, for setting the context there. And the challenge is clear. How do we change our mindsets while building the muscle to do differently and to build differently and to partner more efficiently? I'd like to introduce my panelists very briefly. I'm going to start on my far left. Mr. Nadim Ahmed is the founder and chairman of Global Tea and Commodities Limited. He's best described as a serial entrepreneur, and he's grown this company from a small startup in India in 1991 to potentially the fastest growing integrated tea and macadamia nut company globally, employing over 4,500 people. Thank you very much for making the time to join us. Rita Roy is the president and CEO of the MasterCard Foundation. Those who describe her as a voice for the most vulnerable in society, and she's been doing that work not only at the MasterCard Foundation, but previously with Abbott's public-private initiatives that were related to HIV and AIDS work and other health programs across the African continent. Rita, thank you for being here today. Closest to me, I am joined by the Honorable Aden Mohammed. He's the Cabinet Secretary in the Ministry of East African Community and Regional Development in Kenya. And he comes with a really long track record of service both in public and private sector. In the private sector, his last appointment was the Chief Administrative Officer for Barclays Africa, looking after 10 Barclays subsidiaries on the continent. Welcome, sir. Thank you very much for being here. Closest to me on my right-hand side, I'm joined by the Honorable Dr. Sahar Nasser. She is, of course, the Minister of Investment and International Cooperation in Egypt. She is not an unfamiliar face amongst these corridors. She's also a professor of economics at the American University in Cairo, and in 2015 was named the most influential woman in the Arab economic sector. Thank you very much for being with us here today. And last but certainly not least, joining us is Peter Njonjo. He is the CEO of Twiga Foods, and he's going to share a little bit with us how they are aggregating retail demand so that they can organize an efficient supply chain for fresh and dry goods using technology, using a business-to-business technology platform. Prior to taking up the role of CEO, he spent 21 years with the Coca-Cola Company, and in his last role was based in Lagos, Nigeria, as the president of West and Central Africa Business Unit. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the caliber of the voices that we have with us, and maybe let me start off with yourself, Minister. Let me start off with yourself, Minister Mohammed. And I want to maybe start with a broader picture. One of the numbers that Philippe shared with us, he said 1.7 million jobs per month. So if we were to look at this target against the sectors that hold the promise of delivering on these jobs, firstly, in your view, what are these sectors? And secondly, what can governments in sub-Saharan Africa and MENA do to really encourage investment into these sectors?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I think just to understand the landscape in terms of job creation and the skill sets that we have, a significant number of young people on the continent are either having, college education or below. In fact, a significant number of them do not have, high skills that would make them fit into some of the corporate blue-collar, white-collar jobs that we have. And therefore, we need to find a fit between sectors that can absorb these young people in large numbers versus making right policies or investments in these sectors that actually can play a very big role. So some of the sectors that on the continent will make significant difference are those that have significantly high labor content. And we have seen sectors like agro-processing, sectors like textile and apparels, sectors, like leather production and so on and so forth, areas where Africa has, a natural competitive advantage because of some of the farming activities that we have. And I think we just don't need to, reinvent the world. We just need to look at areas where significant labor content have worked and labor is now migrating up. So for example, we expect in the next 10 or so years, somewhere near approximately 100 million jobs that are high labor content to move from countries like China as technology improves and makes people move into other sectors. So we need to make sure that as some of these labor movement jobs move out of markets like China, we need to be ready for that. And so I would say the sectors that are largely agro, textile, leather and others would play a significant role. Now, what do we need to do to make that happen? First of all, it's one thing creating the space for the labor to actually do that, but is another thing to create the markets for some of these products.
Right.
So for example, in many African countries today, the market access that we have in the US through the AGOA program have played a significant role in creating jobs in markets like Lesotho, like Kenya, like Madagascar, that would ordinarily have serious problems in actually creating jobs for these young men and women. And so I would say we need to look at sectors where we have the necessary ingredients for success that are, we can compete globally and then get the match, if you like, for the skill sets. And to be honest, today, the skill sets are not that high today, and we hope that we will make some progress in those particular sectors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I think you've raised some really salient points. Rita, I saw you nodding there, and I'm going to come to you because the underlying question is, are we actually then investing in the right skills for the sector that the Minister has shared? But before I get there, I do want to come to you, Minister Nasser, because if we think about the lens that you've brought through your career, we've seen you being very deliberate about focusing on small and medium-sized enterprises, and oftentimes in these conversations, we always lament access to finance as the biggest barrier for SMEs. But maybe there's more to that. We've just heard about market access as one of those. What are the other challenges that we're potentially missing that would really allow us to give holistic support to small and medium-sized enterprises, to entrepreneurs broadly, and hopefully those that are sitting in the very sectors that Minister Mohammed has shared?
Thank you very much. I here want to reflect on an important issue here, linking, because creating jobs is the major challenge and economic transformation. And here we need to highlight that you're relying on the private sector, whether it's the SMEs or even the large. So to bring the private sector in and to promote more investment, I think you have to go back to policies. Do we have the right policies? Do we have a conducive, enabling environment, a competitive environment, a level playing field that would be able to bring in the private sector, large or SMEs, and even micro enterprises. And here the link is very important between the policy reforms, what policies are the government adopting to enable and to encourage, to let the private sector actually crowd in the state. And here the cascade effect, and I want to use what the approach that Philippe has referred to, which is the cascade approach, that first, you need to ensure that you have the right investment laws that will bring the private sector, the right incentive packages, but more important, that the market is liberal and that there's no huge subsidies that would prevent the private sector from coming in. And in Egypt, what we've adopted is we freed a large chunk of the public scarce resources by ensuring an effective subsidies of solar and a lot of infrastructure operation, which are also prerequisite for SMEs to come in. They need the infrastructure to be there, not just an enabling environment. And this had allowed the private sector to come in on a solar plant, which is where the World Bank Group has played a very pivotal role in bringing financing, which is a challenge that you have highlighted in your question, to the private sector, but also guarantees from MIGA, because you know that also doing business in Africa in general could be perceived a bit risky, but also them financing the infrastructure that where you need public services there. And that is creating jobs in itself, but more important is encouraging other SMEs to have the right infrastructure and a level playing field to play an active role in creating jobs for our young and growing population in Africa and in Egypt too.
Before I move on, I mean, there's something that you've touched on which I think is very important. I mean, you start off by talking about policies, but we know that governments are also looking at social outcomes. If for just very briefly you were to put on a gender lens and to also think about how do we make these policies work for women who are entrepreneurs, for women who are leading small and medium-sized enterprises, is there a technology lever that we should be thinking about, or is there a specific way we need to sharpen policy so that it speaks to the social outcomes as well?
Here I want to say that sometimes, because it's a bit controversial, but affirmative action is important. So whenever we're tapping on lines of credit and financing for SMEs and micro, we ensure that at least 50% is allocated to women headed either households or enterprises, because yes, it's very true that even on access to finance, women tend to face larger challenge even when they're applying for the same project a male entrepreneur is. So we provide a lot of emphasis on women entrepreneur. We have highlighted a specific article in the investment law that ensures equal access by gender, but also by size of firm and by nationality to ensure a level playing field and a very transparent setup.
So Rita, I'm going to be unfair because I'm building all of these issues that are coming through. We've got a very specific focus on certain sectors that we need to think about. Minister Nasser is saying, well, you actually need to be very deliberate about how you use policies so you can equalize the playing field as much as possible. And so the question to you is that if the target or the reality is this 1.7 million jobs per month in Africa, firstly, there's the concept of good jobs. What does that look like? And does that align with the kind of skills that we know the MasterCard Foundation and others are already investing in terms of equipping young people on the African continent to be ready for those opportunities as they arise?
Thank you so much for your question, for the commentary, and for my colleagues on the panel. Let me first start by saying that we're thrilled to be here. The MasterCard Foundation is just embarking on a bold new strategy called Young Africa Works, where we aim to enable 30 million young people to access dignified and fulfilling work over the course of the decade. I want to come back to the 1.7 million jobs per month. First, I think we need to have a mindset shift in the word job. The reality is, if you look at sub-Saharan Africa and we look at this very youthful, massive demographic shift that is going on, we know that formal job creation cannot keep track with the reality of work. So at the foundation, we prefer to use the term work. And when we speak to young people and we listen, and I was looking at the Twitter feed recently, ask somebody, what is dignified work? People don't speak in terms of formal or informal jobs. That's irrelevant to them. What is relevant is work which they're passionate about, where they have skills, and for which they can continue to learn, look after themselves, and look after their families. That is the definition of dignified. And so I want to pick up on a couple comments which were made earlier. In terms of skills, the minister already spoke about the industries or the sectors of the economy where sub-Saharan Africa has a comparative advantage, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's in services, in light manufacturing, and increasingly as economies digitize, what is very, very clear is there's plenty of work around to be done in order to sustain growth in all of these economies. But this work is invisible. It's invisible to young people. When you think about value chains and you think about construction in many countries where their bold goals have been set on 100,000 houses in a city, etc., that house represents millions of jobs, from the artisans who will be working on door frames, windows, knobs, to materials which are being created, to logistics, to storage, to planning. That's work.
Yeah.
And enabling that work to be visible to young people is critical. So then comes an investment in the right skills.
Right.
By understanding what are the right skills which are in demand for the marketplace, and then equipping young people. I have to get one more word in about gender, because you asked that question. So with Young Africa Works, we set a target of 70% of that 30 million target would be young women in dignified work. And so it does require greater intention, focused, and looking at what are some of the barriers which are different for young men, which keep women away from accessing dignified work.
So again, the emphasis comes back to mindset shift and being deliberate once you've had that mindset shift to build the muscle to make it happen. Peter, I want to come to you because Rita's touched on this idea of value chains. And now I know you're very passionate on the subject about value chains and ecosystems. And if you may very briefly just talk to us a little bit about how Twiga is connecting farmers to using the technology to urban vendors. And in particular, what is the implication for the value chains that they then become embedded into? What are the ecosystems that they become a part of? And what is the superpower, if you will, that this gives these particular farmers because of the deliberate work around value chains and ecosystems?
Thank you so much. And I think first thing is I always find it very apt to start by describing the problem that we're trying to solve as a company. And what you find is that based on data that was shared by the World Bank a few years ago, 50% of disposable income on the continent is being spent on food. So when you have double-digit inflation, food inflation, what it means is that you're starting to suck up resources from other sectors of the economy just for people to feed themselves. If you look at that number of 50%, that's similar to what consumers were spending in the US in the 1870s. So, and if you look at the number that the US is spending right now on food as a percentage of disposable income, that amount is less than 10%, which means that as an economy, you freed up resources to be used in other sectors to spur up other industries. And at the heart of this problem, and I think Cabinet Secretary Adan Mohamed touched on market access, but the issue is, the bigger issue on the continent is local market access. And this is because of retail fragmentation. If I look at a city like Nairobi, 6.5 million people being fed by 180,000 individual retailers. So if I'm investing in farming, who am I selling to? There's no addressable market, and that's a huge challenge. And we've seen in countries where there's an addressable market, there's a lot of efficiency that is built into the supply chain, which frees up a lot of resources for development. The UK, a couple of supermarkets control 80% of retail. They only spend 8.2% of disposable income on food. South Africa, a neighbor to Kenya, 4-hour flight away, only spends 16%. So what we are doing as Twiga is leveraging technology to aggregate the informal retail, because we understand, what we've seen is that when you aggregate the informal retail, you start giving farmers an addressable market. All of a sudden, it makes sense for farmers to go and get debt to invest in their farms because they know where they will sell. But also, you empower thousands of retailers who can now access goods at much more affordable prices and also at better quality. And that's essentially what we view to be our purpose as Twiga.
So they're accessing markets, they're accessing debt. I want to bring this to you, Nadeem, because I think you're also in the business of connecting local farmers, not only to national opportunity, but to regional and global opportunities as well. But I want to start off on this idea of value. So we're talking about value chains with Peter, and I want to talk to you about value addition, because you have been quite vocal about Africans being very deliberate about value addition, in particular when it comes to our resources and creating good jobs. How should we be doing this differently, especially because this conversation has been about mindset shift? What do we need to do differently if we're going to make value addition more than just a talking point that we discuss at conferences and on stages like this?
Thank you very much. So we're talking of two things here. We're talking of job creation and value addition. To me, job creation is the first step towards creating value in the end product that we produce. Too much of one doesn't lead to prosperity on the other side. So the most important thing for us to worry about is, are we creating jobs, which is an end in itself, or are we creating jobs towards ultimately having that product end up in a finished form, in a value-added form, in the retailer shelf? And if that is the aim, then we're heading in the right direction. My concern is there's far too much money chasing an easy outlet. And the easy outlet is to dump it into the ground where you can start growing something very quickly, invariably a cash crop, and the cash crop doesn't help the farmer. Ultimately, if you look at what's happened to a lot of commodities, we end up having too much of it, and too much of it leads to the farmers selling it at below cost. That doesn't help anybody at all. More importantly, it doesn't create a community of people with skills, with expertise, blue-collar jobs, white-collar jobs. But more importantly, it leads to creating a whole host of people who are actually at the subsistence level and just about surviving.
Yeah.
Now, that's not the aim. If the aim is to create value chain, we need to hold back from investing in commodities which are already over-invested. So, for example, I'll give you a simple example from real-life experience. When you buy a cup of coffee, you pay about $2 for it. 200 cups are made in a kilo. So the retailer in the developed country is earning $400 for every kilo of coffee beans that he buys. The grower gets, if he's lucky, about $4. So we are talking about 1%.
Yeah.
In real life experience, if you look at the West and what's happening in Africa, in the West, the commodity cost, the raw material cost of a product is roughly 30 or 40%. Roughly. It could be 50%, in some cases it could be 25. I'm saying roughly 30 or 40% is the raw material cost of the product going into the retailers. If one example of coffee is 1%,
Yeah.
can you imagine the upside? So what I can't understand is that despite the fact that there's no limit to finance availability and people are ready to invest, it is not going in the right direction. So if Kenya can create M-Pesa, which has changed the lifestyle, it's changed the way we think, it's changed the way we bank, and in fact, it's been transported to the rest of the world actually. Kenya has been a leader, M-Pesa has been a trendsetter. What is wrong with putting coffee into a jar and selling it for 10 times more? All you're doing is crushing it, roasting it, putting it in a can. It's not happening. Now, there needs to be a mindset, and which is exactly what Philippe talked about. There needs to be a mindset that we will have to do it. So our product will not go out of the country unless it's put into a value-added form.
So I want to test that for a moment, because I think you make an incredible point. I mean, we've been talking about value addition or beneficiation, irrespective of where we are on the African continent for a while now. And I want to test that with you, Cabinet Secretary. And I'm going to come to you, Rita, as well, because the point that was made, that Nadeem also made, is that when we invest in value addition, we invest in better jobs. But Minister, let me come to you first. What appears to be the biggest hurdle to allow us, in simplistic terms, as Nadeem has said, to take the coffee, put it in a jar, and sell it in that form, in a value-added form, instead of the raw bags of coffee beans that we're often exporting to other markets outside of the continent. What is the big challenge that we're still grappling with today that has been stubborn, clearly, for decades?
I think, first of all, when we talk about Africa and the economic transformation, the challenges that we have today can oftentimes overshadow the progress in the journey that Africa has traveled over time. If you look at some of the basics, I think if you look at some of the fundamental issues that as a continent we've come through, look at the process improvement in areas of governance, for example, the change in leaderships in many African countries, the voice of Africans in putting their governments to account and making sure that they can drive the agenda as much as they can. Of course, a lot of things took time and we got to where we are, but if you focus on that journey and what the future holds, look at some of the transformations that have happened. Today, Africa is probably one of the countries or continents which has one of the highest mobile phone penetration. And I'm confident that what mobile phone has done for the telecommunication sector, one day solar will do for electricity, for example. Today, the connection to electricity is one of the most difficult on the continent, and the solar technology is becoming cheaper and will make things much easier. Now that said, industrialization and value addition is one of the Africa Union's Agenda 2016 program.
Yeah.
We have very, very clear roadmap in increasing value addition, whether you're talking about tea in Kenya that Nadeem is doing, or cocoa in Ivory Coast or Ghana in terms of value addition. A lot has changed in the last few years. But if I was to highlight a few key challenges that are today holding us back, one is in different sectors, human capital in different forms, whether it's about the skills being available or if they are, what is their productivity, is a major issue. And a key part of that is looking at our education sector and program.
Yeah.
Are the skills that we are producing fit for purpose to help people create jobs, or as Ms. Roy says, the work that is required to do that? So investment in supporting people in areas of entrepreneurship, in supporting people to employ people,
yeah,
is much more relevant than just having a lot of humanities degree or middle college that we need. But just to end, what I would say is for every 10 jobs that are created on the continent today, 8 or 9 of them are created by small and medium-sized enterprises.
Yep.
And that, I think, if there is one area that the continent and policymakers are working on today, whether it's through affirmative action, whether it's creating the market access, whether it's increasing the level of integration on the continent through the CFTA, for example, it is supporting the small businesses that are today the engine of job creation and the engine of value addition as we go forward. Thank you.
So you've made some really profound point in terms of just giving us that historical lens and saying, look at the progress that we've made. We're not there yet. Rita, I'll come to you in a second, but Minister Nasser, I think there's a very interesting link that has been made here. If we think about the World Bank Development Report that's recently just been issued, it has a firm focus on value chains. And I think the argument there is that better integration into global value chains equals better jobs. It's a straight equation. Your thoughts on that, and how do we make the equation true on the ground?
Yeah. You were saying what are key challenges in Africa, and I think you've answered that very clearly. It's integration. We need more economic deepening, more commercial ties, and definitely that requires connectivity. So there is the transportation connectivity, I think mobility of goods and services and of people and labor, it's a prerequisite, and that requires mass transportation and all the different transportation mechanisms. And this is where, again, I will say we want another beam ban. How can we do not just solar, but do more, bringing the private sector in with the support of an enabling environment that the government would. Second, connectivity through digital connectivity. connectivity. So if you really want to integrate and deepen the commercial and the investment ties, that's another prerequisite. Another one is also electricity. I think that's an important. Egypt has been working on that, as Egypt is currently, President Sisi is presiding the African Union. So connectivity and infrastructure is a priority, because when you reflect on how the economy in general has operated, whether in the US and in Europe, you see that connectivity is a prerequisite, a strong and sound infrastructure that would encourage the private sector in an investment. So whenever we're discussing investments, yesterday we had a meeting with many of the large companies here from the US, the first question that would come is infrastructure, is transportation, connectivity, maritime, railways. So these are very important that we invest in, but we also bring the private sector in, because we know that also we still have some budget deficits and we have scarce public resources, and that is why, again, policies would matter here to bring more investments in.
So I love how this equation is playing itself out. So it's investing in value addition plus economic infrastructure plus human capital plus skills equals jobs or good jobs. But Rita, what I want to test and come back to you, and I'm going to encourage our panelists now for us to put on our solutionist hats on and really look at how do we solve for these issues. Rita, we've heard a lot about value addition, value chains, and how that leads to better jobs. Minister Nasser here is saying when we invest in better economic infrastructure, that in itself leads to better jobs as well. What can organizations like the IFC or more broadly the World Bank Group do to ensure that all of these variables are actually leading to good jobs for young people to meet and surpass the 1.7 million need? What more can these organizations do?
So, of course, I want to be very cautious about advising any institution like the World Bank, which does incredible work, as well as, and the IFC does incredible work. There are a few things, though, which come to mind, and one has to do with the what we do, and the second has to do with how we go about it. So with regards to the what, clearly institutions like the IFC and the World Bank Group as a whole have already made the right investments in infrastructure, as we've heard. But if we are really thinking about dignified work, if we're thinking about economic competitiveness of countries and the continent, then the most critical thing is to get behind the vision of various governments which have clearly prioritized growth sectors in the economy. Get behind that vision. Align our funding, our resources behind that vision in terms of priority sectors, understand demand for particular skills, then work with either the educational institutions, vocational institutions, disruptors in education to equip young people with market relevant skills. Close that gap, that's asymmetry between where it's very difficult for job seekers to even know where to look, let alone employers to know where to look for the right talent. Close that gap. And most importantly, let's use something where clearly the continent is well ahead of the rest of the world, which is in simple, basic, but highly effective technologies. And as economies digitize, that creates even more visibility in terms of where market opportunities are. That's the what. The how, I think the how goes back to some basics, which is listening. President IFC spoke about partnerships. I think listening to and really appreciating the critical needs and solutions which are coming from the continent and getting behind those. That's important. When I think about the partnership between the IFC and the MasterCard Foundation, which was really focused on enabling affordable, low-cost, highly accessible financial services, we had to do a lot of listening to banks and other institutions on the continent. And that listening resulted in 15.5 million new digital financial service users. You can't do that unless you pay attention and unless you listen and you partner well.
So we've moved, Peter, we've moved from high theoretical conversations about how do we create jobs for millions of people, how do we transform economies, to a very personal challenge. the challenge of listening, the challenge from not coming from a place of having all the answers and really having your ear on the ground in terms of what the market is saying. So I want to bring this question to you, and this is a question about, practically speaking, where have you seen the impact of good listening that has brought about innovative financing instruments and tools that are actually having the desired impact on the ground? And maybe if we listened more, we might be able to replicate these across sectors and to replicate and scale across multiple markets.
Thank you so much, Nozipo. So one of the things that is a challenge for building a startup in Africa is that you need to build an intellectual property that solves a problem that you're trying to address, while at the same time, you have to create a little enabling environment to support your business. And I want to give an example. When we started Twiga Foods, we couldn't access capital to lease assets, distribution vans, very simple things just to move produce from farmers to market. So it meant that when we were figuring out where to raise capital, we had to raise capital not only to build the intellectual property, but to buy the assets. And I'm underlining the word buy. If you think about a startup that's sitting here in the US, they don't have to buy the asset. There's already a well-established market where they can lease the asset. So what you're finding is that you're sitting in Africa and the barriers to entry are much, much higher just for you to be successful within that environment. And I want to give one use case where we've partnered with IFC, and this is something that's live. One of the big challenges that I mentioned is around domestic market access. So what you find is that, yes, farmers want to work with us. Farmers want to grow produce for us so that they can access the market, but they don't have access to capital. So I would say that this was a very impactful first use case of what I'd call blended finance. Because then what IFC did was to put together a guarantee facility. And this guarantee facility then allows farmers to access capital or debt from banks that they would ordinarily not have accessed. And essentially that's off the back of an offtake agreement from ourselves. That's something very, very innovative that us put together. And you can see that once that is done, then this becomes a trend in terms of what other use cases can we derive for blended finance across a continent? What other barriers can we eliminate? Because what we're seeing is that we need to lower the threshold for success for startups on the continent. And essentially, that's how you create a thriving SME sector. We started with 5 employees. Today, we employ 500 people, in a span of 3 years. Chances are maybe in another 5 years, we'll employ thousands of people. How do you create more Twigas across the continent? Because in essence, that's what then starts crystallizing the 1.2 million jobs a month.
So Nadim, I think the question that Peter's ended on is a question for you. How do we create more Twigas, those that have the ability to move from 5 to 500 jobs in a space of 3 years? And I know that you've got quite a view on creating the linkages that allow companies like Twiga to break out of the national market into the regional market and into the global market. The question to you is, what more can organizations like the IFC, the World Bank Group broadly do to make sure that this is not just an example that we're using here, but we wake up a few years from now and there are multiple Peters sitting on the stage talking about the African and MENA success story?
So we are talking about a monumental problem, and the way to sort it out is not through any one agency, whether it's private enterprise or government. It has to be a partnership. And the most critical part of it is somebody needs to translate the vision of the local government in place with the dynamism and the enterprise of the entrepreneur and convert that into a reality. Any one of them will struggle. The reason we have succeeded, for example, in Malawi is IFC came around and we started doing some work about 4 or 5 years ago. And soon we realized that it was not just an investor. unlike a private equity or a hedge fund, they were not just an investor. IFC gave us the wherewithal to deal with issues which we as a privately owned company would have struggled with. We wouldn't have the bandwidth, nor would we have the expertise in the overall skill set that IFC possesses. So things like water systems that we are using, solar power, irrigation, outgrow farming, smallholders. Just 2 weeks ago, I was with the IFC team in Malawi. We've now got 3,000 farmers, of which at least 52% are women, to work with us on our project. And where IFC is coming in is not just to help us with the finance. We've already done that bit ourselves.
Yep.
What IFC is doing now is upskilling the farmers into not just growing the plant, because we've given the plant to the farmer. Normally, 50% is the mortality rate. So if you give 100 plants to a farmer, because of the lack of skills and the knowledge, 50% of the plants die. That's money down the drain. IFC has come in to teach them the skills, irrigation system, how to use their expertise, how to get the fertilizer at the right time, how to treat the plant.
Yep.
All these things we wouldn't have the bandwidth to do. We were doing it in a small way. The fact that we are doing it with 3,000 farmers overnight is because of the support from IFC. So as I said, it has to be a combination of both private and public partnership, and then only it will happen. And the real transformation will come, as I said earlier, when we start getting $2 for our coffee rather than 1 cent. That's the real one. Yeah.
All right, so we're going to have to begin to wrap this conversation. I'd really want to wrap it up in a very fun and interesting way. Now, my panelists, if you notice, there are cameras at the back of the room. Those are my media colleagues, and they are desperately looking for a headline that they're going to be using on the 7 p.m. news tonight.
Can I just add one more line to this?
Yes.
That what we are talking about is reality, and products made in Africa. We have Kericho Gold made in Kenya, is getting a much better retail price than what Harrods in London is selling for. So per bag, we are getting 17 pence, and you can buy a bag in Harrods for about 11 pence. So you can make a product world class with the finest packaging in Africa.
So that definitely sounds like a fantastic headline, but I'm not going to allow you to get away with it. But thank you for making a very good point. So we need to get a headline for the news today at 7 p.m. Now remember, it is just a little bit of text that goes underneath your name when your face comes on screen. It cannot be an executive summary. It cannot be a story. It is just a sentence. And the sentence has to start with job creation and economic transformation. And then you complete the sentence. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what generally happens at this point is that they all start looking away from me because they don't want me to choose them first. All right, so I'm going to, Nadim, because you were cheeky enough to do a plug, I'm going to start off with you. Job creation and economic transformation, that's how your sentence starts, and we're going live. Your strapline, please.
It is no longer a matter of if and when. It has to be done, and it has to be done now. Or we'll keep talking about products as a commodity and never as a finished form.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, those are the titles that scroll up at the end of the movie, but I think it's a really good point. Can we give him a round of applause on that? Thank you very much, Nadim. Really hitting the point of urgency. Rita, this is your moment of being a journalist. We've got a live hit right now. You need to start off your sentence with job creation and economic transformation. Over to you.
Job creation and economic transformation in Africa begins with making invisible opportunities visible to young people.
Ladies and gentlemen, Rita Roy, can we give her a round of applause? I have a sneaky feeling that this one's going to be really good because you were looking away from me for such a long time. All right, Minister. Job creation and economic transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, coming to you live from the stage at the World Bank.
The future of job creation and economic transformation in Africa rests with the small and micro, enterprises.
Enterprise. Round of applause.
What we need,
Okay.
what we need is we give these people the space, and governments need to get out of their way.
Perfect. Ladies and gentlemen, give him a round of applause. So that's what we call a live hit. So he's out in the market reporting for us. Thank you so much. So Minister, I'm going to be kind. I'm going to give you the last word. So let me come to Peter. Peter, job creation and economic transformation.
So job creation and economic transformation in Africa can be unlocked by enabling entrepreneurship.
By enabling entrepreneurship. Let's give Peter and Njanja a round of applause, please. In fact, that was the closest to a strapline that we've had so far. We've had a lot of reports coming through so far. Final word, taking us home as the news begins to wrap this evening, job creation and economic transformation.
Job creation and economic transformation in Africa and in Egypt requires continuing the ambitious economic reform program in a very inclusive manner with a lot of focus on youth and women.
With a lot of focus on youth and women. Ladies and gentlemen, as we wrap up this conversation, suffice to say that the messaging has been clear. We need a mindset shift. We need to rethink our partnerships. We need to rethink the way that public and the private sector are working together. We need to rethink the tools from financing instruments that we are using in the market. And if the IFC and the World Bank Group broadly are going to be the de-risking machine that we have aspired to be, then this mindset shift is a non-negotiable. Thank you so much for making the time to join us. It's been a fantastic conversation.